Today I am going to talk about the study of the state. I must tell you that this is the most fundamental concept in political science, and today you have to accept the fact that it is also very central to the study of society as a whole. But this is also a very interesting and difficult concept, difficult only in one sense. Its meaning has kept on evolving, kept on changing, and some people see the change, but most people do not see the change, and that is our challenge. So, what I am going to do today is to tell you what it meant to me when I was a student of political science, when it meant to me in the first 20 years of my teaching, let us say, and what it means to me today. Because today we are in the second decade of the 21st century, and there is a new context, and I am going to study this concept of the state in this new context. But before that, what did I mean by state when I was a student? I had got a very legal, formal definition of the state from our textbooks in those days, that state is an institution having population, territory, government and sovereignty. Indeed, that part of the definition is still valid today. After all, India is a state, it has population, more than 1 billion population, it has a territory, having all these boundaries from Himalayas to Kanyakumari, the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea, Bay of Bengal and so on. It has a government which comes to power through elections according to the constitution, and it has sovereignty. The borders are defended by our army, and this sovereignty is defended from within the country also. If anybody challenges, then the police and the paramilitary forces, they stop, they repress any rebellion from within. So, still those 4 things are valid, but I was not told that power is the central aspect of this institution. That when police stops you and tells you that this is not done, the state is interacting with you through the police, or it has a power to give me a scholarship because I was a good student, or I am a scheduled caste, scheduled tribe or OBC student, or a woman student. So, the state through its government is giving me this scholarship. So, or the army on behalf of the Indian state is defending the border vis-a-vis Pakistan or Bangladesh or China or whatever. So, the state operating through the army and the police, the coercive organ on the one hand, and the state funding our education system, the public health system, our hospitals, giving me a scholarship, ordering that land should be subject to some tax, or land reforms should be carried out. Now, it is the same state. Power is used either to enforce something or to provide something for the good of the people. So, for my first 20 years, I began to discover in my study of the state that it is about power, it is an organization of power. Now, so from the mid 70s onwards, we introduced the topic, for example, the nature of the state in our study of Indian politics, study of political theory and so on. Because you will not find this in your textbook chapter on the state, on the nature of the state, or the social character of the state, or social basis of state power. In other words, the question is, who wields power? In whose hands power remains? And who are the powerless in society? That was the question which was raised by many Marxists, liberals, others, they all raised this. And Marxists said that you have to ask which class organizes the institution of state to exercise its power. And we have that Communist Manifesto statement that government is the committee of the bourgeoisie. In other words, in a capitalist state, the capitalist class exercise state power. And then we had a big debate. Does it exercise state power on behalf of one class as its agent, or it is more complicated? We know about those debates, the Miliband versus Polanyi. When you read that literature, you will know that. Polanyi saying that yes, it is class power, but it has autonomy of itself. Miliband saying that no, it is directly exercising capitalist class interest. Then we have Gramsci who said that state exercises power, but not always through direct exercise of military power or police power. It exercises power through what he called hegemony, that is trying to capture the mind of people, trying to tell people that it is helping them, trying to get support of the people. That is what is called legitimacy. We will come to that in a moment. So, this was about who wields power, who wields state power, what is the social basis of the state. We began to ask those questions from the mid 70s onwards. In the late 80s and 90s, this power question was also expanded, because we discovered that it is not only the capitalist class or feudal class or some classes, it has many other social characteristics. Upper castes, the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, the Kayasthas or Karans and so on, the landed castes and the culturally powerful classes, upper castes in different parts of the country, and some upper sections of the cultivating castes, they exercise power. So, now we began to ask the question, class as well as caste. Then in white dominated racial countries, white race also exercises state power. That is why there was a big agitation, a movement, both armed struggle and peaceful movement against apartheid, the white regime in South Africa, and it succeeded in 1990, and from 94 onwards we have one person, one vote. So, we have white, blacks, they all share power, and black majority exercises power. So, there was a class, caste, racial dimension. Not only that, do men exercise power or women exercise state power? We began to discover that there is a patriarchal character of the state, that the whole organization, whether it is the taxation system, majority in the army, police, or education and health systems, even welfare systems, they all support male child, they all support male population, and the male dominate the organs of state power. So, we began to discover the class, caste, gender, ethnic, ethnic and also religious. Hindu majority state in India willy-nilly gives more advantage in state power to the Hindus, and Muslims are not exercising the same amount of state power as Hindus. This has been pointed out by many committees also. So, on the other hand, our constitution gives every person one vote, all are equality before law, but that is a goal. In practice, in political power, we have this reality of political power exercised through the state. So, this was in the 80s and 90s we found who exercised state power. Class, caste, gender, ethnicity, that is non-tribals exercise state power, not the tribals, not the Adivasis, and so on. Now, what is it that we emphasize today in this second decade of the 21st century? That is most interesting. You know, in 21st century, there are two very important things. We all talk about globalization. What it means is that states and nations, countries, they are all interconnected now. In reality, what it means is that Western capital or Japanese or wherever there is capital and technology, both finance as well as technological capital and military power based on that. Now, capital moves from one country to another, crossing the boundary of the state, crossing the territorial boundary of the state very easily. So, remember that original legal formal definition of the state, territory as one of the characteristics, no longer that is now so valid. So, globalization suggests that capital has crossed the state boundary. In other words, it also crosses the sovereignty. So, sovereignty has become diluted in this context from above. So, this is the point. You should always see how the formal legal concept of state is being exposed. It also means that migration has become so important. You have diasporas, Indians in America, Southeast Asia, Africa, Chinese in Southeast Asia, America, Canada, and so on. So, you have diasporas, therefore, the population as a important characteristic of the state. You have to see population living in that territory or population in the whole world. So, that is the other thing. So, globalization is entering into the sphere of the state operation from above. But not only that, we have now people's rights consciousness emerging from below. This is extremely important. You have people's movements who are asserting that, for example, Adivasis are defending their right to forest and land and water, and in the name of development, if mineral industries or mines have to be opened and mineral industries have to be set up, they have to respect the rights of the Adivasis. That is why we have a land acquisition bill which is being debated, it is still not passed. We have a Forest Rights Act which is now given, which has now given right of the Adivasis over forest and land, and so on. So, not only that, Dalits, Adivasis, women, these rights, children's rights are now so important. Disability people, disabled people, people's rights are so important that no state can easily violate them. They have to all be respected, and that is why you have at the UN level there are conventions, and there is a Human Rights Council now at the UN, which is every time investigating if these rights demanded from below are being respected. Now, these rights are defended through movements, through people's movements or social movements. That is why rights are now not only concessions from state, that was the old definition. Rights are legal recognition of claims made by people. Sorry, that is only one part of the definition. Yes, rights have to be made into law, like the right to education, Forest Rights Act, Narega giving 100 days assured employment to the rural population in India. Yes, but they are only some concessions given. Rights are demands made by people through struggle who think that they have to be inalienable human rights justified by the very existence of human beings. So, rights are affirmations through political struggle based on civilizational values, and there are many NGOs now who are also defending these rights, social movements and NGOs from below. Therefore, what are the two most important things in 21st century today? One, globalization, movement of capital, positive, negative, in my opinion mostly negative, because it is violating the autonomy demands and rights demands from below. But on the other hand, autonomy demands and rights demands are coming from below. So, both these are simultaneous trends, and study of state has to take into account these two trends. Study of state has to be located in the globalization context, which is penetrating the sphere of territory, population, sovereignty and government power, all four into the society, and from below people are demanding rights and therefore limiting the power of the state on all aspects. Those are the two things. But there is a third thing today as 21st century unfolds, and you have to take that into account, and that is that studies of not only state, not only of politics, not only of culture, not only of society and economy, studies of all kinds today are no longer confined to Western models, Western theories. They are now truly global, truly global. History of India, China, Iran, Egypt, Brazil, South Africa, history and civilizational legacies of all these countries now are throwing out ideas and theories, because now we know that for 200 years we were told that all knowledge, all education, all civilization that came from the West through colonial instrumentality, that was the best knowledge, best science, best theory, best philosophy. Now we know that that was because colonial power through military subjugation came to rest of the world. Now world has changed. World has changed, it is seen in BRICS, Brazil, India, Russia, India, China, South Africa. But that is only 5 big countries from 4 continents, Asia, Africa, Latin America and Europe. But that is a symbolic representation of what is happening throughout the world. The little country Somalia, which is suffering a civil war, is now conscious that they have civilization, they have culture. Now, European anthropologists and cultural theorists can't tell that Africa was a dark continent without civilization, it needed to be civilized. In fact, colonialism had a civilizing mission. So, this is very important. What are the ideas of power and freedom? What were the ideas of exercising power, for what purpose, what kind of good society image? What was the notion of stateness? That is very important to study from the traditions from all countries of the world, not only from the West. I must admit, very few people have written about it. The textbook that you are reading every day, they do not even acknowledge that there is a new knowledge explosion, there is a new moment in the history of knowledge. And unfortunately, our UGC, ICSSR, MHRD are yet to capture the intellectual meaning of what I am talking about just now, and a few of us in different parts of the world are talking about just now. The Asaflan intellectuals, Asian, African, Latin American intellectuals who want to be truly global. We are not anti-Western. We want to see Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau to the present theorists of state, Miliband, Polanyi, Gramsci, or now the present theorists. We want to take them together with the rest of the world. Unfortunately, our school education, our college education, our university education has not given us the tools. We do not even know. We have not read anything about African civilization. We have grown up believing that Africa had no civilization. There are now books, several books on African civilization. So, that is the third important element in the history of knowledge, in the history of human civilization, that today our minds have been liberated from the colonial baggage which had crippled us, which had told us that that is democracy, this is the theory of democracy, theory of state, theory of secularism, theory of federalism, it all is what came from Europe during the last 200 years. Whereas, each of these ideas have a certain idea in terms of a value and practice, and that has history all over the world, because human societies is trying to create some conditions for building new societies. Well, now let us move on to first make a distinction between state, government, society and nation. This is an elementary thing you have to keep in mind. Now, you can imagine now that state is about power and it is the aggregate power structure of society. It is an organization of aggregate power structure of society. Aggregate power structure, class, caste, race, gender, ethnicity, religion, all that together. And Marxists have a point when they say that among all this, class force is very powerful, because you look at the reality today. Capitalist state with its military power, with its power of the global capital, technology, speculation power, legitimation power, all this is so powerful that it tries to manipulate all the other dimensions. But I would like to add, these other dimensions are also very powerful, very important. So, in the name of class centrality, do not neglect caste, do not neglect patriarchy. So, it is as much a Brahminic feudal dominated power structure as the capitalist state. So, you have to see all these elements together. So, state is an organization, is the organization of aggregate power structure in society. Then what is additional in society? Society includes the state, but society has something more. It has culture, it has social relations like in the family, religion, kinship, social networks, where power is not evidently recognizable. You have to become a student of politics to see the power element in that social structure. There is politics everywhere. Politics is about the power relations related to certain end or purpose or freedom or transformation or change or defense, something like that. Power with an end, that is politics. Power process with a purpose, that is politics, and there is this dimension in every aspect of society. But society per se may not make it evident. For example, when you study the family, you study politics in the family as one aspect, but there are other aspects, the cultural socialization and values and so on. So, society is wider than the state. It is also state to be also understood as wider than government. Governments formed by humans and organizations change, but state changes only through revolutions or only through constitutional overthrow and things like that. I mean constitutional replacement and things like that. So, please remember, sometimes you can be anti-government, but not anti-state. You do not agree with the UPA policies or NDA policies or BJP policies or CPM policies, you are against the government, you are against the party which is forming that government, but you are not against the state, you do not want to destroy the Indian state or turn it into many units or change its republican system into a monarchy and things like that. So, so the constitution therefore defines the Indian state. So, for example, directive principles of state policy, that chapter 4 of the Indian Constitution, use of the word state, that is what you have to keep in mind. State directs the government. Okay? I will give you another example. All governments try to defend the state because they have taken oath to defend the constitution, meaning defend the nature of the Indian state. And therefore, there is a law which bans overthrow of the state, waging war against the state. So, there are many Maoists, Naxalites, so called terrorists and so on, who are under UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, or Disturbed Areas Act, or Armed Forces Special Powers Act. They are arrested, even killed as for waging war against the state. You can fight the government, but if you fight the state, then none of the parties, none of the governments will tolerate it. So, that is the meaning of the state. So, you have to make a distinction between state and government, state and society, state and government, then state and nation. Nation is a very particular aspect. It is the political identity corresponding or defending a cultural identity. So, political security for a cultural identity, a political framework for cultural identity, that is a nation. So, the Indian nation, for example, that the cultural heritage from Ashoka to present day, or Mohenjo-daro to present day, and multilingual certainly, yes, and it is a concept which is debated. So, there is the Indian nation like that, but I would like to talk about an Odia nation, a Bengali nation, or a Dravidian nation, Assamese nation, Naga nation. So, these are all cultural identities, but they all want political power. So, political power defending a cultural identity, that is a nation, but this is a concept which continues to be debated and grown. So, the cultural dimension is the specific concept which adds to political power in defining the nation, but it is being imagined, reimagined always, this concept of the nation. So, you have to keep that in mind: state, society, government and nation, distinct, but how they are overlapping, you should always remember that. Now, the important point today in the context of the 21st century is to see what is new about the nature and functioning of the state in India and globally. There are three things you have to keep in mind. First thing is that if it is about power, then in what respect, for what purpose power is exercised? Is it power to defend a regime or a class? By all means, that is army, police, military, bureaucracy, the main agency of state. Or the second thing is it power which is, as I said in the very beginning, is it the police and the army, or is it the scholarship given by the state to you? That scholarship dimension is about the welfare dimension. Is it also using state power to attend to some human needs, and those human needs are now described in terms of human rights, people's rights, globally as well as in different ways from the social movements. That is one question. What is the purpose for which power is used? And then the other issue is it being used less and less for a very specific purpose, and thereby allowing others to do other things? In other words, if the business people are being let free to do their things for some reason, we will come to that in a moment. In other words, the degree to which state power is exercised, is it exercised more or less, and if less, for what purpose? The first question still is relevant. This is the second. And the third aspect is, what has the globalization of capital and technology meant to the modern state or the contemporary state? So, let us take these three questions, are the three major issues of our time to discuss. For what purpose? And this was in Western theory, it was the laissez-faire theory. So, the purpose was maintenance of law and order. Laissez-faire means let alone, let citizens be alone. And please remember, when Hobbes or Locke believed in laissez-faire state and let citizens be alone, they left it to the actual power situation in society. So, those who have power, those who are strong, the capitalists, the male, the landlords and so on, they will have more power. They will be let off, and they will be told that, look, the king, or after the republic came into existence, the government, the republican government will give protection. Nobody will be allowed to violate law, so that you can open your business, you can start your factory, you can move around freely for trade and so on. So, that was laissez-faire or let alone theory, or the coercive character of the state meant for law and order purpose. But then, with the growth of people's consciousness in 19th century in Europe, people demanded that there should be roads for everybody, there should be public hospitals, people have left villages, come to the city, there should be light on the street, there should be drinking water available in taps. So, the city government, then the national government began to take some welfare measures. Remember, this is a situation which is there in all traditions. Sher Shah in India built roads linking one part of North India in the east to the other part. So, I mean Patna to Lahore. In Africa, the Egyptian civilization has many such welfare measures. In China, the hydraulic system, the irrigation system, the Grand Canal from north to south, north to Hangzhou, Beijing to Hangzhou, I mean the northern state, right from Shanxi province to Zhejiang province, Grand Canal was also built. In other words, whether king's power, and king has an army, whether the king's power or state power is used only for maintaining law and order, suppressing rebellions. China also had those secret societies and rebellions, they were suppressed. India also had many wars, many chieftains, they were suppressed. Africa also. In other words, laissez-faire and welfare, the way the Europeans put it, was not only the European experience, it is a global experience. Whether power is used to defend some people and their class interests, or their caste interests or religious interests, or power is used to help in some ways. And in what ways? In 20th century, those welfare issues were expanded even further as capitalism met with crisis during the depression 1929, the Great Depression. And after that, the American President Franklin D. Roosevelt started the New Deal policy that states should pump in money. State can print money, because it has the power. So, state can set up industries, give employment, then create purchasing power, so that factories can start running. And so, you saw the emergence of an activist state. So, laissez-faire state, welfare state and an activist state. From New Deal right up to the Great Society program in Lyndon Johnson days after John Kennedy died. So, 63 to 68. Now, then the important, but this is not only in the US. The newly independent countries, China, India, maybe liberal democratic, socialist, new democratic, people's democratic, or one party states in Africa after independence, they all had a promise in course of anti-colonial struggle that they will give the minimum needs to people. That is very important to remember, that the activist state was a natural choice of all the newly independent countries. Jawaharlal Nehru started planning. We had our plans, land reforms, agricultural development, industrial development, public education, public hospital system, IITs, IIMs under Government of India and so on. These were all functions of the activist state. But then something happened in the late 60s and early 70s particularly, that the activist state was also becoming affected by new interests, particularly two kinds of interests. So, the bureaucrats inside the government, landlords and capitalists outside the government, they began to make it difficult for the activist state to practice welfare. So, you had corruption, you had rentier capitalism, you had bureaucracy which was becoming expanded, and government becomes the explanation. Government was to blame for all the ills. Poverty persisted in India, large magnitude of poverty, corruption increased, inequality grew, same with African countries, and therefore, there was this upsurge against all the regimes all over, and therefore, the capitalist class in the West gave the slogan that this activist state must end and there must be a limited state. They started structural reforms, they started globalization, they started demanding that capital anywhere must have the right to go anywhere in the world. Anywhere they meant capital was mostly in the West. So, Western capital thus was made to go everywhere, and the state in independent countries, particularly in Asaflan countries, the third world countries, were asked to open doors. So, China started the open door and reform policy, India started the reform policy in 91, China started in 78 and so on, all over the world this started. And today that trend has been challenged, because that went to an extreme in which they could not manage this new economy. So, capitalism ran into crisis after crisis, first in the 88, 89 East Asia crisis, then small crisis now and then, and the big crisis came in 2008 with the American subprime crisis, the bad loan crisis, which affected the whole world. And now capitalism is on the defense, they want state to play a positive role. So, unfortunately, China and India had not accepted that slogan from the West, that state must withdraw, exchange must be made free. So, only the there was only limited liberalization of foreign exchange, not the full liberalization, and so on. So, this is the first thing, that from coercive state to the welfare state and the activist state, that has been the evolution of the state globally. The second thing is about responding to the demands of people, and you remember Antonio Gramsci, the Italian Marxist, had said that the reason why there is no revolution in America or Britain or Western European countries is because the West has taken number of legitimation measures. Legitimation measures mean that state takes measures to create support in the minds of people, and people genuinely believe that state is not only a military organization or a police organization, it is also a welfare organization. It is doing things for people, and through elections people elect leaders. So, leaders form government, therefore, elections and some welfare measures, they are the legitimacy measures. Now, therefore, legitimation is a very important activity, coercion and legitimation, but you have to see that the demands from people are so strong that there is also a positive response measure of the state that it has to take. I first talked about it in analyzing the emergency. In India, in the emergency, you had suspension of fundamental rights, but also declaration of a 20-point economic program, which meant land reforms, Dalit welfare measures, lot of very positive measures, which continue on the statute book even now, policy book even now. And during the last 10 years, the UPA government 1 and 2, they have introduced many rights based development acts, development measures. The Right to Information Act, the NREGA, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, guaranteeing 100 days assured employment to rural citizens who demand it. Then the Forest Rights Act and the Right to Education Act 2006-2009 and so on. Now, these are not just symbolic measures to create support, they are more than that. They are responsive measures to create some base, some conditions, so that people feel that as citizens in a state they enjoy some rights. Though considering what is needed to eliminate poverty, NREGA is only a destitution relief measure. Considering what is needed to provide good equal education to all through common school education, free access to university and so on, Right to Education Act is only a very small measure. In other words, these are very, very small measures, but they are still important measures. Therefore, contemporary state has to be seen as a coercive, legitimative as well as responsive organization. And this is why you have one has to see the duality of the state. The duality of the state manifests itself in coercion as well as response, authoritarian exercise of power as well as democratic exercise of power. It is essentially authoritarian, no doubt, but modern state cannot only be authoritarian because of the human rights demands from below and from above. It has to show that judiciary is independent. It has to show that even a repressive law has been passed by the parliament. You see, it has to get it passed. It has to conduct elections, free elections, though we know that all of the dominant parties, they share the same ideology of globalization, neoliberal agenda and authoritarian defense of the Indian territory. So, but those are important. So, duality of the state, in other words, understanding the contemporary state has to be more sophisticated in the context of the 21st century. Therefore, the second issue is about responsive state, how it has to be necessarily dualistic, authoritarian as well as responsive, authoritarian and as well as democratic in responsive sense at the same time. The third dimension it is exercising power for what purpose? Today, the limited state is the agenda of the ruling elites in India and globally. In other words, state must withdraw from welfare and must allow economy to be liberalized, so that capitalists have a free environment to invest and carry on their production and trade. So, state today is a direct ally of corporate interests globally and within India, and this is what people are challenging. So, today the Indian state on the one hand has all these rights based laws, right to education, Narega, etc. On the other hand, it has the repressive laws, Armed Forces Special Powers Act, Public Security Act in Chhattisgarh, Public Safety Act in Jammu and Kashmir, Disturbed Areas Act all over the country, UAPA and so on. Therefore, today it is giving direct support to capital, but even then we have to remember that second point, that if we only take it as a police state, we cannot handle it. We have to appeal to the Supreme Court, we have to see what is happening in the elections. True, media is corporate media, media is supporting as a part of the corporate interests also the state to operate in the present environment. But even then, this sophisticated, complex nature of state power today has to be kept in mind. Though in the name of analyzing complexity, do not forget that it is an aggregate organization of power. So, today Indian state is a developing capitalist state in a neoliberal environment globally, and in the hands of upper caste, patriarchal, Hindu, non-tribal interests, but constantly being challenged in this environment of people's movements. Therefore, let me conclude. All subjects have to be problematized, historicized and concretized. Remember, whatever you are studying, if you are not doing these three things, you are failing in your intellectual task methodologically. You have to problematize. That means, whatever you have learned, you have to question that, you have to open the issue. So, you have learnt about the state as a 4 characteristic country, open it up, problematize. Even what I said as aggregate power structure, problematize it, question me, question my formulation, that will take you forward. And historicize as the European political theory treatment of the state from Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, Marx and today. And historicize today globally in the Indian political thought from Kautilya to today, Kautilya to Gandhi, because Gandhi has a fantastic formulation on the theory of the state as a normative theory. State should really abolish itself as an organ of power and turn itself into a self-governing community of people, individuals, groups and villages, areas. So, Indian, Arab, Chinese, Egyptian, African, Latin American and so on. So, historicize your study of the state and concretize what is happening around you. If you can't relate your study of the state to the police or to what the university is doing to your right to education, right to free thinking, right to organize yourself as free human beings, what the Indian government is doing, what the American government is doing in Pakistan or Afghanistan or Iraq, if you can't relate it, or what the Human Rights Council is doing to protect your rights, what the welfare state and the university is doing to provide you positive welfare things for your noble existence as human beings. If you can't concretize and relate that to your historical and theoretical understanding of the state, then you will be failing. Therefore, study of the state has to be reopened in the emerging political theory. Thank you.
Yeah, it's real to listen to you that you made an insightful and provocative lecture before us on the contemporary nature of the Indian state as well in political theory and practice. But now question is that that as you already problematized and prescribed the things to the study of the state, that how one way the state is making many arrangements for the people in social and economic sector, and another way the state is also promoting violence, that is the state terrorism towards the people. It is minimizing people's democratic rights, where the peoples from Niyamgiri to POSCO, they are agitating against the state terrorism, the state dominance. Another way, the state is also giving the welfare nature to the people, that is through the senior citizen pension yojana, that is through the right to education, that is through the Norega, that way. So now the question is that the state is facing challenges from the civil society and social movements of organizations, social organization movements. Another way, the state is also facing problem from the globalization, and another way, the state is also facing challenges from the radical elements, that is the Naxalite movements as well as the terrorism. So that way, another way, that is one part of the challenges. Another way, the state is responding through the state terrorism dominance, as I already told you. In that context, do you think that state is withering away, or state is just centralizing its position?
Very good question. Certainly, state is not withering away. State is reaffirming its position. It is more aggressive as an organization of power, as a coercive organization, very clearly at this moment in the interest of capital at the national level and the global level. Because the whole slogan that we must have high growth rate, that is the agenda of the state. To achieve high growth rate, for example, they want to do the FICCI agenda, the Indian capitalist organization's agenda of clearing the Naxalite areas, so that minerals can be exploited and mineral industries can be set up. So, it is very clearly exercising coercive power through paramilitary, military and police organs to facilitate accumulation of capital by dispossessing the poor, the Adivasis and the poor farmers. Now, therefore, please remember, Marx had talked about withering away of state at the stage of communism, which is far away. It does not happen in the stage of either capitalism or even socialism, and we are still in the era of capitalism and its challenge. In other words, the socialist revolution has not yet taken place or has not been completed. Even the democratic revolution to overthrow capitalism in all its aspects is not over. That is my assessment. Now, therefore, and withering away of state means both in Gandhi and Marx, it means the transformation of the interest and power structure to such an extent that all individuals, groups and areas are self-governing individuals, groups and areas. Okay, that is the ultimate goal. We would all like to achieve that, but for achieving that you have to fight power structures based on class, caste, ethnicity, religion and gender. All these power structures have to be fought, so that we move away from this capitalist system to a sort of a socialist and democratic system, so that we create conditions, but that is a very, very long, several centuries will be needed to have that kind of transformation. Therefore, let us not talk about withering away of the state. Even if the state cuts down education and health budget, even if it privatizes health and education as it has done in India, in China it is also happening, in many countries, because that is the agenda of global capital, that states should withdraw from economic and other welfare activities. People should earn money in the market place, so that they can pay for their education, health, pension and everything. So, that does not mean withering away of state, that only means that from some areas state is moving to other areas. It is now becoming highly sophisticated in its coercive power. I will give you an example. The drone attack which Bush started in Afghanistan and Pakistan, tribal areas, which Obama has continued, it is the most sophisticated use of technological power to kill, target and kill. Okay. When it was carpet bombing, that is chemical bombing in Vietnam by the American bombers in the 60s and early 70s, that was bad enough, but now it has gone another step. Same thing is going to happen in India, in the Naxalite areas and some of the terrorist areas, possibly. They want to target some, they are already doing that. So, false encounters was the start, drone attack is the next, targeted killing by technological means without sending people to kill, you see. So, today the state globally and in India and all countries is using to target its enemies using high technology. Okay. So, state is very, very powerful in some areas, in some aspects. It may withdraw from some other aspects. It is not withdrawing or withering away, it is really aggressive reassertion of state power.
Sir, I read one of your book that is on people's rights. There is a chapter on the NGOs and the state. There is a debate regarding the that how NGO is playing role in the present day state politics. And I have also heard your lecture somewhere that you are saying state within state, how NGOs are collecting money from the international agencies and they are dominating in some areas where state is absent. So that way you are making the theory that is the state within state in regard to these dominance and the larger role of the NGOs. How do you respond to that?
The NGOs represent one aspect of civil society. Civil society means articulate interest groups who operate in defense of their interests. Okay? These are the NGOs, these are there can be many kinds of organizations. So, there are many interest groups of the oppressed people who are not part of civil society, they are outside the political market, power market of the elite. So, the point you made is that there can be state within state if there are liberated areas by Maoists or terrorists controlling or self-determination movements in some spheres, and or civil society has taken over the agency on behalf of the state to manage that area in many aspects. So, but this does not mean that you should underestimate the power, particularly the coercive power of the state. What has happened is, two things have happened. One, I have already mentioned the highly sophisticated character of coercive action of the state. The other is the highly sophisticated capacity to influence the minds of people through satellite television, through cultural activities, through education, through San Petroda's agency of the the new education policy, the knowledge society strategy of the Indian education makers, private education system, that 24/7 cultural television and so on. So, this sophisticated capacity, intensive capacity to create and involve people in state activity and create legitimacy is also very high.